Hi, my name is Maya, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Earth Sciences at the University of Alberta. My thesis focuses on the Middle to Late Devonian Horn River Group in the central Mackenzie Valley and Mackenzie Mountains of the Northwest Territories, Canada. And this presentation goes through some of my work studying porosity in this interval. The Middle to Late Devonian Horn River Group of the West Central Northwest Territories is comprised of the Hare Indian Formation and the Canal Formation, which are both organic-rich mudstone successions. This group also includes the Ramparts Formation, which comprises reef, platform, and ramp carbonates, and is present locally in some areas but is also absent in other locations. The Ramparts Formation is not present in the core that is the focus of this presentation. To provide some context, the organic-rich Canal Formation is the source of the conventional hydrocarbons produced from reefs of the Ramparts Formation at Norman Walls, and now the unconventional reservoir potential of both the Canal and Hare Indian Formations is of interest. The study area, which is highlighted with the blue arrow, is situated in the central Mackenzie Valley of the Northwest Territories, which is approximately 600 kilometers northwest of the city of Yellowknife. More specifically, this presentation focuses on the core taken from the Husky Little Bear N09 well. Porosity is the fractional volume of a rock that is occupied by pore space. This porosity is filled with fluids like water, oil, or gas, and understanding porosity in a potential unconventional reservoir is important for a few different reasons. First of all, pores store hydrocarbons, and so pore volume affects hydrocarbon storage capacity. The pore type can influence the behavior of different fluids like water, oil, or gas in a reservoir, which affects production. And connectivity of pores, so permeability, influences fluid flow pathways through a reservoir. There are a few different types of pores present in organic-rich mudstone units. Pores within the mineral matrix are the first type, and mineral matrix pores are then subdivided into interparticle pores, which are pores between particles, and intraparticle pores, which are pores within particles. A few examples of interparticle and intraparticle pores are shown on this slide. Organic matter pores are a second pore type. These can be present in the original structure of organic matter or can form later because of processes like thermal maturation or desiccation. And finally, if uncemented, fractures are considered to be a third pore type. This project aims to understand the nature of porosity in the Horn River Group in order to interpret the evolution of the pores in this interval and to identify the best predictors of porosity. Ultimately, this work will contribute to reservoir evaluation by furthering our understanding of the distribution of high porosity intervals, of hydrocarbon storage capacity, potential flow pathways, and wettability in this interval. So we've integrated a few different types of data from the same core for this study to measure porosity. First, we looked at bulk porosity, which is total rock porosity. For this, bulk volume of a core piece was measured with mercury immersion, and then grain volume was measured using helium, and this is used to calculate porosity. We also performed nitrogen gas adsorption experiments on 4 samples, which gives information about maximum pore size. These experiments were also used to determine pore volume and pore size distribution for pores with a radius larger than about 1 nanometer. And then for these same samples, we captured scanning electron microscope images and used point counting and image analysis to quantify the number of different pore types present in each sample. To describe porosity in this core, we used scanning electron microscope images. And then to look at controls and predictors of porosity, we compared our quantitative porosity results with other characteristics like mineralogy, facies, microfacies, total organic carbon, and vitrinite reflectance, which is a proxy for thermal maturity. And we did this because all of these factors can possibly influence porosity. Moving on to results, 5 lithofacies were identified in the Horn River group of the N09 well. Just a reminder, a facies is a group of rocks with similar attributes. They can be useful in resource exploration because they make up groups of rocks that are expected to behave similarly when it comes to certain properties, for example, permeability, porosity, or hydraulic fracture propagation. Here I'm showing lithofacies, meaning that they were grouped based on lithology and other sedimentological attributes at the core scale. So lithofacies 1 is a calcareous mudstone. Lithofacies 2 is a siliceous mudstone with common calcareous laminae and centimeter scale carbonate beds. The first facies 2 image shows the carbonate laminae, and then the second one on the right there shows a more siliceous interval. Lithofacies 3 is very similar to facies 2 but lacks the carbonate laminae and centimeter scale beds. Lithofacies 4 is a homogeneous appearing fissile argillaceous mudstone. And then Lithofacies 5 is similar to Lithofacies 4, but with common organics and fossil fragments on bedding planes. All right, so now I'll be going through the microfacies observed here. This microfacies scheme was established by Sarah Biddle, who is another grad student at the University of Alberta and one of my co-authors. Sarah established this classification by looking at thin sections from the Horn River Group and several cores from the central Mackenzie Valley. And it might sound obvious, but microfacies are grouped according to microscopic properties. In this case, microfacies are useful in addition to lithofacies because, as you might have noticed on the previous slide, there's limited variability in the Horn River Group of this well at the core scale. And so microscopic investigation is helpful to gain further information about the sedimentological properties of this interval. So 6 of the 7 microfacies in Sarah's scheme were identified in thin sections from the N09 core. Microfacies 2 is a heavily dolomitized argillaceous mudstone. Microfacies 3 is clay dominated and variably biarticulated. Microfacies 4 is an unbiarticulated silt-bearing fine mudstone. Microfacies 5, which is shown on the bottom left, is an unbiarticulated silt-bearing fine mudstone. Microfacies 6 is a medium mudstone and it's variably biarticulated. As you can hopefully see in the image, microfacies 7 is a phosphorus mudstone. And then microfacies 8 is an interclass rich mudstone. And the interclass are the elongated lighter color features in this image. Now looking at bulk porosity results, this plot shows porosity for each lithostratigraphic unit in the core, with the Hare Indian Formation separated into the Bell Creek and Bluefish members since these two members have fairly different properties. The Canal Formation and the Bluefish member of the Hare Indian Formation have the highest mean porosities, and you can see that the largest standard deviation is associated with the Canal Formation. Looking instead at porosity split up per lithofacies, lithofacies 2, which is siliceous mudstone with carbonate beds and laminae, has the highest mean porosity but also the highest standard deviation. And finally, looking at these results grouped by microfacies, microfacies 3 has the highest mean porosity, but many of the microfacies display a high standard deviation of porosities. Looking at mesopore size distribution, pores with a radius in the range of about 1 to 2 nanometers occupy the greatest volume for all 4 samples. However, a smaller peak is observed in the 2 to 3 nanometer radius range for the Canal Formation at 1727 meters. This shows that pores in this interval are very small. And I know pores in all mudstones are quite small, but here the highest pore volume by far is associated with the very smallest pores that can be detected with this technique, which will have some significance later on when I compare this group to other fine-grained reservoirs in North America. Next, I'll go through the different pore types observed here. Interparticle pores between mineral grains are present in all 4 samples examined with SEM. These interparticle pores may be empty, filled with organic matter, or contain authigenic minerals such as pyrite, clay, or dolomite. In 2D, the observed interparticle pores typically have an elongated and irregular shape. Some connectivity is associated with pores between mineral grains, however, it's on a small scale. So point counts reveal that on the scale observable with SEM, interparticle pores are the most abundant in all 4 samples from the Horn River Group interval in this core. Several previous studies, including work by Shearer and also a recent 2020 paper by Levi Knapp and others, have interpreted that intervals with a high proportion of biogenic silica experience a lower degree of compaction because of higher rigidity and cementation associated with this mineral. Biogenic silica is common in the Horn River Group, especially in the Canal Formation and Bluefish member of the Hare Indian Formation, in the form of recrystallized radiolarian tests, which likely explains the high proportion of interparticle pores here. A few different types of interparticle pores are present in these samples. There are interparticle pores between pyrite rhomboids. Intraparticle pores within dolomite crystals are also present. These pores were especially common in the sample from 1810 meters in the Bell Creek member of the Hare Indian Formation. These pores likely formed by dissolution caused by organic acids produced during thermal maturation of organic matter. Intraparticle pores are also present in microfossil fragments. So in pyrite rhomboids, dolomite crystals, and microfossils, intraparticle pores are irregular and for the most part isolated in 2 dimensions. Finally, intraparticle pores can also be found in clay platelets and typically have elongated shapes without significant interconnectivity in 2 dimensions. Pores in organic matter are also observed in the Horn River group of the NO9 core. Some of them have a bubble-like morphology, as you can see here on the left, while others have more of a crack-like shape that you can see in the image on the right. In the Kimmeridge Clay Formation, Fishman et al. 2012 interpreted that organic matter pores that are very sharp and are commonly present along mineral organic matter boundaries and that have edges that parallel one another, that these were likely induced from desiccation associated with core retrieval. And so as a result, the crack-like pores observed here were also interpreted as induced rather than natural pores because they also have these qualities. In contrast, we interpret that the bubble-like pores observed here formed naturally as gases were produced during thermal maturation of organic matter, and in 2 dimensions, these bubbly organic matter pores are isolated from one another. Natural fractures are present in this core. These centimeter to decimeter scale natural fractures are common in the more siliceous and calcareous lithofacies, so 1, 2, and 3, but are not observed in facies 4 and 5, which are more clay-rich. Now, trying to understand the controls on porosity in this interval, we'll first look at mineralogy. A clay porosity crossplot shows that there is some relationship between clay content and porosity, with porosity decreasing as clay content increases up until clay content reaches about 20 to 30 weight%. It seems that once clay abundance reaches above approximately 30 weight%, porosity stays in the 4 to 8% range and doesn't get any higher, possibly because once clay content reached a certain abundance, compaction was significantly greater because of increased ductility. This plot also excludes samples with high carbonate content because these samples seem to have a wide range of porosities, suggesting that carbonate content has a variable effect on porosity. This might be because diagenetic carbonate precipitation would have reduced porosity, whereas partial dissolution of carbonates during thermal maturation of organic matter would have enhanced it. This is a plot of quartz content and porosity for samples with relatively low clay and carbonate abundance. You can see that there's a clear positive relationship between quartz and porosity, as shown in yellow. Looking further into controls, the relationship between porosity and TOC is displayed on this slide. There is no clear relationship here between TOC and porosity, although a TOC porosity relationship has been observed in several other organic rich mudstone reservoirs, including the Barnett, the Marcellus, and the Horn River group of British Columbia, which are all intervals displaying a high proportion of organic matter pores. This lack of relationship between TOC and porosity suggests that organic matter pores are not the dominant pore type in the Horn River group of this core and are not as significant as in other organic rich mudstone units where there is a positive correlation between TOC and porosity. So there are a few possible explanations for this. It may be the result of compaction, destroying more organic matter pores in the Horn River group of the central Mackenzie Valley than in other fine-grained reservoirs. However, the mineralogy of the Cannell Formation and Bluefish, member of the Hairy Indian Formation, is comparable to these other North American mudstone reservoirs, and so it's unlikely that compaction was greater in these units compared to other mudstone reservoirs, and this is likely not the reason for a lower proportion of organic matter pores. It has also been suggested that organic matter porosity is greater in gas mature samples compared to oil mature samples because migrated bitumen fills these pores in the oil window and then is expelled as thermal maturity increases. However, the samples from the study plot in the gas condensate zone, meaning that this explanation is also unlikely. And then a third possibility for the lack of correlation between TOC and porosity is the type of organic matter present, which may have led to a lower abundance of organic matter pores because original kerogen type is thought to affect the potential for organic pore development. And in this case, this seems like the most likely explanation for this lack of relationship here. Continuing to look at factors that may influence porosity, we considered thermal maturity by looking at vitrinite reflectance and depth. Vitrinite is a type of kerogen, and its ability to reflect light changes with heat. We also look at depth because thermal maturity is expected to increase slightly with boreal depth in an interval. Neither of these plots display a significant relationship, and both have quite low correlation coefficients, suggesting that thermal maturity is not a significant control on porosity in this interval. Multivariate statistical analysis was also used to support and further our understanding of controls on porosity in the Horn River group. So this type of analysis is used to gain information about the covariance between interrelated variables. So in this case, we were looking at the relationship between porosity, mineralogy, facies, microfacies, and total organic carbon. Shown here is a plot of factors 1 and 2. Factors are produced from the data set and are statistically independent combinations of the variables. So for example, factor 1 explains about 19% of the variability in the data set. Looking at this figure, variables that plot closer together, for example, facies and microfacies, have a higher correlation, and variables that plot further apart, for example, quartz and pyrite, have a lower correlation. In this case, porosity plots near calcite, quartz, and clay, meaning that these have the highest covariance with porosity. So this plot shows factors 3 and 1 now. In this case, porosity plots nearest to facies, and then clay, calcium, siderite, dolomite, and quartz. The relationship between facies and porosity seems to be largely explained by mineralogy, with trends in mineralogy per facies matching trends in porosity per facies. In both this plot and the one on the previous slide, microfacies plots fairly far away from porosity, reflecting probably that the microfacies classification scheme used here is largely dependent on sedimentary fabric rather than just composition. Now, comparing the average mineralogy of the Canal, Bluefish, and Bella Creek from this study to averages from the literature for other organic rich mudstone reservoirs, the Bluefish member of the Hare Indian Formation and the Canal Formation are comparable to many of these other intervals, with the Canal Formation even playing on the high end in terms of silica content. And here we are comparing bulk porosity and N2 pore volume from the Horn River group of the NO9 core to the values from other intervals found in the literature. So looking at the plot on the left, which compares average bulk porosity results from this study, and those are plotted in blue, to averages from the literature shown in gray, the Horn River group of the NO9 core shows comparable bulk porosity. However, looking instead at the plot on the right, the N2 pore volume of samples from this study shown in blue are significantly lower than those of the values from other North American fine-grained reservoirs. N2 adsorption experiments primarily resolve pores in the mesopore size range, suggesting that there might be a lower proportion of mesopores in the Horn River group of the NO9 well than these other mudstones, which might be attributed to a lower proportion of organic matter pores based on observations from the SEM results. So if you're going to take one thing away from this presentation, I think this work shows that mineralogy is the best predictor of porosity in the Horn River group of the NO9 core, and that for resource exploration, mapping intervals that are characterized by high quartz, low carbonate, and low clay content is likely the best way of identifying high porosity intervals in the Horn River group of the Central Mackenzie Valley. There are a few different implications of this work. Bulk porosity of the Horn River group in this core is similar to that of producing North American reservoirs. However, the interval in this core does not possess the interconnected network of organic matter pores observed in other organic rich intervals. This is significant because for mudstone units that do have this network, it has been suggested that this is a potential hydrocarbon flow pathway, which may be absent here compared to other unconventional reservoirs. However, natural fractures present in lithofacies 1 and 2 and 3 have the potential to act as small-scale hydrocarbon flow pathways to induce fractures. Now talking about wettability, which describes the preference of a solid to be in contact with a particular fluid. In gas-mature units, organic matter pores have been shown to be hydrocarbon wet, whereas mineral matrix pores tend to be hydrophilic or mixed. Because of its lower abundance of organic matter pores, it is possible that the Horn River group here contains a greater abundance of mixed or water-wet pores compared to other units, which could affect hydrocarbon production. I want to say thanks to Core Labs Canada, to the NTGS, and to Husky, and also thanks for the opportunity to present my work. Thanks for listening.